Welcome to the Matt Bernier Show.
What is going on? This is the Matt Bernier Show on DRF TV. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. Today is Friday, June the 16th. However you're watching, whether you're watching live with us on live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forums Twitter page, or the Daily Racing Forums Facebook page. Thank you for doing so. If you want to check this thing out podcast version, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com. Bunch of ways for you to check this show out. Again, today, Friday, June the 16th. This is going to start off with a little bit of a review, if you will. The Triple Crown, we get all excited about it. Really, it's a 6-month build-up after the Breeders' Cup is over. And all eyes are on the first Saturday in May with the Kentucky Derby, and hopefully leading into a Triple Crown possibility at Belmont Park 6 weeks later with the Preakness sandwiched in between the two races. And it's really the thing that gets us through those cold winter months, depending on where you are. If you're in some warmer climate than here in New York, then obviously it's not quite as doom and gloom. But point being, all eyes are on the first Saturday in May and spring. We want to see what these 3-year-olds are capable of doing. And just as quickly as it gets here, it's done. And here we are now. It's sort of the post-mortem. We can take a look back and see what happened going into the Triple Crown this year. I think everyone would agree the only thing that was consistent and constant about these 3-year-olds was that they were inconsistent, that they just sort of took turns as king of the totem pole, as high man, saying, you know what, this is my turn, this is my time, whether it was a Classic Empire who was the leader in the clubhouse, and he didn't necessarily live up to expectations early on, but then he came on and he had a very successful and promising Triple Crown campaign, but he didn't get any victories, so that's always going to be sort of a disappointment there for him and his connections. Or whether it was a horse like Mastery that looked like he was going to be the one that could possibly sweep the Triple Crown. Unfortunately, he was injured and off the Triple Crown trail just as quickly as he showed up on it, because he was pulled up right after the San Felipe. So there was a lot of inconsistency leading up to it, and guess what? We've had about a week to digest what happened in the Breeders' Cup, in the Belmont Stakes, and guess what? Things are about as clear as mud right now. They all take turns, and they just keep beating up on one another. Let's go back 6 weeks ago, though, and let's start off with the Kentucky Derby. Going in, you didn't have any sort of prohibitive favorite, including the 2-year-old champion, Classic Empire. You had a couple of horses coming out of major victories in their final preps, whether it was Gormley in the Santa Anita Derby, whether it was Irish Warcry in the Wood Memorial, or IRAP, the maiden, coming out of the Bluegrass at Keeneland. There was one horse, though, that based on what he had done in South Florida, and he kind of showed up out of nowhere, considering it was his stakes debut, his graded stakes debut, winning the Florida Derby. Always Dreaming was a horse that you thought could be something, and he shows up the first Saturday and does this. Travis Stone with the call.
Horses. Irish Warcry is there on the outside. McCracken swings wide. Classic Empire does too. And looking at Lee, cut the corner off the turn. They're racing for the final furlong. Always Dreaming, digging down deep on a 2-length lead. Looking at Lee, wanders off the rail. Now with 3 lengths to make up and a 16th to go. But Always Dreaming is digging down, and Always Dreaming is holding on. Looking at Lee, can't catch Always Dreaming, who's the 143rd winner of the Kentucky Derby.
A really strong effort from Always Dreaming, and he looked like he was sort of that unexposed horse that ever since Todd Pletcher had gotten a hold of him, it was take baby step, baby step, baby step, sort of against what Todd's normal plan is, where a lot of these horses early on, they just go right into graded stakes races, and they belong in graded stakes races. This horse, they took sort of the kid glove approach. They went through all the motions, they went through all of his levels, got into the Florida Derby, won that impressively, and then went on to Churchill Downs and won the Kentucky Derby impressively. But a lot of people coming out of that race wanted to look back, and rightfully so, saying, you know what, it was a wet track. The inside seemed to be where you wanted to be. For the most part, that's where Always Dreaming was, and I understand on the backside he was in that 2-3 path, but he was toward the inner portion of the racetrack throughout. And then you had the start of the Kentucky Derby, which was much scrutinized, because you had a horse like Irish Warcry just completely take a left-hand turn, do his best Byron impression, and clean out half of that sort of outer auxiliary gate, including Classic Empire, who took the worst of it. Then he gets something thrown back in his face. He's got a swollen eye. He's on the worst part of the racetrack, and he still runs a game 4th. That led a lot of people into Baltimore for the second leg in Racing's Triple Crown to think that, you know what, the Preakness Stakes was ripe for the picking for a horse like Classic Empire. He was really going to be cranked up and ready to go for this one. A lot of people thought Always Dreaming was the horse. Obviously, what he had done in Kentucky, what he had done in Florida, that maybe he was the horse that was going to go on and make it look like we would have a Triple Crown possibility at Belmont Park just 3 weeks after the Preakness was run. Chad Brown had other ideas with cloud computing. Dave Rodman with the call.
Cloud Computing Conquest, more money. Guanabara is trying to gear up on the inside, but is under a drive, and they're into the stretch here at Pimlico, and Julia Leperoux and Classic Empire have a 3-length lead, but Cloud Computing on the outside is coming with a run. Cloud Computing outside keeps on coming. Classic Empire, Cloud Computing, head-to-head down to the line. Cloud Computing wins the Preakness by a head from Classic Empire.
Cloud Computing gets it done. Chad Brown's first classic victory. We're going to take a look at Cloud Computing's horse profile, his card right now, and give you all the details as far as his overall. No, we're not going to, apparently, is what I'm being told in my ear. No big deal. Cloud Computing is an interesting horse, and the thing was, and this sort of played into the whole narrative leading up to the Kentucky Derby, where you had a horse like Cloud Computing who was so impressive breaking his maiden at first asking. Then he goes into a graded stakes race, and he runs very, very competitively in the Gotham. It's a scenario where maybe things didn't go his way, but he's going to be forwardly placed. And you know what? He was the one that did, I think, the most running in that spot. J-Boy Zecco had the ideal situation considering the way things were working at Aqueduct that day. Then you go into the Wood Memorial, where he is one of the choices in there, and he runs well enough, but he had some things go against him. Point being, he shows up in a race like the Preakness. He's looked over at 13-1, and he goes on and delivers a performance like that. And I don't think anyone can really criticize it, other than maybe the fact that Classic Empire had to do more of the dirty work, where he had to put away Always Dreaming, who we'll touch on in a minute, and then he had to hold off a horse like Cloud Computing, who was fresh coming into this spot and looked like he had some upside. So here we are through 2 legs of the Triple Crown. You have 2 different winners. Not only do you have 2 different winners, but you have the Derby champion throwing a complete bomb in the Preakness, where really he gave up pretty willingly on the far turn. John Velasquez tried to get into him, tried to get something out of him, and there was nothing there. And that plays into the whole Todd Pletcher narrative of, you know what, time between races. Doesn't like to wheel them back in short order. Likes to give them a little bit of a breather between races, get their legs back under them, have them ready to go. I think there was something to that. I know a lot of people wanted to say just because the Preakness is a different animal, you can't treat that as the same way you would any other Pletcher horse wheeling back in 2 weeks. I reluctantly acknowledge that, but I still believe that there was something to that 2-week thing. Todd, if he had his way about it, wouldn't have run this horse back in 2 weeks. That's just not what he does. So that just made things even more sort of throw up confetti and see where everything lands and whoever still is remaining. The one thing that was sure and constant was that Classic Empire had at least reverted back to his good form. And he was stringing together good race on good race. He ran well in Kentucky. He won the Grade 1 Arkansas Derby. He almost won the Preakness. So he was the most consistent thing. He was the most sure thing that we had leading into the Belmont Stakes. In the Belmont, you had a couple of other interesting things that it looked like, you know, you had the fresh faces that sat out the Preakness, including horses like Taprit, horses like Irish War Cry, horses like Patch. And then you also had the international invader, Epicaris, coming in from Japan. He ran very well in the UAE Derby. Some would argue, myself included, that he's supposed to win the UAE Derby and not let Thunder Snow come back on him. And then there were the people, myself included, I probably gave up on the UAE Derby a little bit too early, saying that, you know what, Thunder Snow, not because of his antics in Kentucky, you're not going to hold the Churchill Downs issue against him, the bucking bronco show that he put on, but, you know, Master Plan came back and ran quite poorly in the Peter Pan leading into the Belmont Stakes. You had a couple other horses that just kind of left a little bit to be desired, that maybe the UAE Derby was not some spectacular race. Keep in mind, Lancaster Bomber, who ran 4th in there, he's always been thought of, or 3rd or 4th, one of the two. He was always a pacemaker over in Europe for Aidan O'Brien and all of the other big horses, including Churchill. So Epicaris, anyway, long story short, he was an interesting sort of fresh face coming over here, and it felt like if you were ever going to have sort of an international runner come over here and take one of our big races, maybe that was going to be the one, just because things were a little bit topsy-turvy. Well, the day of the draw, Classic Empire is withdrawn because he has an abscess in the foot, same thing that bothered him down in Florida. Chaotic situation turns even more chaotic. Then we find out a few days later that Epicaris, he might be lame on the right front. So now it's just complete chaos. The way I looked at that race, I said, you know what, I don't trust anyone. I like Irish War Cry as a horse. I just don't trust him. I don't know what you're going to get out of him. He stopped badly in the Derby. I decided to go with some off-the-wall horse with Twisted Tom. He had a little bit of trouble. But the point was, coming into the Belmont, you didn't know what to expect. And you know what? Coming out of it, it was a very formful result, which made my sort of hypothesis, my theory, seem a little bit foolish. Larry Colm was turning for home. Tappert wins the Belmont.
Cry turns for home with Tappert trying to run him down in the last furlong. The two of them are now a half length apart. They are clear of Gormley and Patch. It is Irish War Cry. And on the outside, Tappert. Tappert has taken the lead. Tappert and Irish War Cry come down to the line together. It is Tappert and Jose Ortiz in the Belmont Stakes. They have defeated Irish War Cry.
Great call from Larry Colmus. As always, Tappert wins the Belmont Stakes. We do have Tappert's horse profile and his horse card with all of his connections here. You see now he's a millionaire, and this was a good effort. This was the thing that, you know what, if you wanted to go back and look and say his 6th place run in the Kentucky Derby, not nearly as bad as maybe it seems. I thought it was just an even effort, that he never really offered much. But you know what? The public had this one right, because they had Irish War Cry pegged as the favorite in here, and they had Tappert, I believe, pegged as the second choice, and they run 1-2 in this spot. Irish War Cry loses nothing in defeat in the Belmont Stakes. It was a good effort, all things considered, from the top 2, and even the top 3 if you want to include Patch, the other Pletcher entrant. So here we are. This is how we'll button up this sort of Triple Crown review. We didn't know what the heck was going to happen going into it, and we really don't know what the heck's going to happen coming out of it, because the 3-year-olds, they've just taken turn after turn after turn beating one another. This feels very similar to what we had last year. Now, I highly, highly doubt we're going to have a horse the likes of Arrowgate show up and sort of just seize control of the division, but I'm not going to be surprised at all if we find some sort of fresh face that comes along and says, you know what, this is my division for the taking. I'm going to take this thing over. You guys all wanted to just kind of hand it off to one another, pass the baton. I'm going to say no more. I'm the leader here, and we're going to take this thing home. Because right now, if you told me you had to make a bet or you had to vote on who you think the best 3-year-old in the country is, I don't know that I could. As far as accomplishments are concerned, I think it is Always Dreaming, just because he's got the 2 grade ones, including the Kentucky Derby, which is really the 3-year-old's holy grail. Whether I agree with that idea or not, but that's really the way things are weighted here as far as our 3-year-olds are concerned in North America. I do think we're going to have some things change, and possibly change rather quickly, because before you know it, we've only got about 5 or 6 weeks until the Haskell down at Monmouth Park. That's usually run the same weekend as the Jim Dandy up at Saratoga, and leading into the Travers toward the end of the Saratoga meeting. So a lot of things still to come as far as the 3-year-olds are concerned, but right now, about as clear as mud, the 3-year-old picture. We're going to take a break. When we come back here on the Matt Bernier Show, we're going to take a quick look back at what happened last weekend at Belmont Park. We had a couple of races that we went over, some previews. We'll find out how we did, and then later on we'll get you ready for a couple of races down at Churchill Downs tomorrow night, a big day of racing underneath the Twin Spires. Stay with us here on the Matt Bernier Show.
Well, the amazing thing about our work was just how similar he is to Uncle Mo. I mean, right away, of all of Rapoli's babies, he stood out as the most advanced, the most precocious, and the most talented, and that was exactly the same thing we'd seen a few years before with Uncle Mo.
Outwork wins it for John Velasquez.
To be able to win a Grade 1 like the Wood Memorial in only his 4th lifetime start was very impressive.
It is Outwork in front. California Chrome, straight and strong. Absolutely sensational. California Chrome. California Chrome. To California Chrome. Away to the Kentucky Derby. California Chrome wins impressively.
He's gone into overdrive. California Chrome wins the Dubai World Cup.
One of the greatest performances you'll ever see.
Chrome turns to gold.
Say goodbye to your inner caveman. If you're making caveman bets on pick sixes, you could be leaving money on the table. DRF Bets Ticketmaker helps you build more profitable exotic bets and place them with one click. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticketmaker. Be a samurai with your ROI. DRF Bets Ticketmaker helps you cut out unprofitable exotic bets before they happen and be the master of profits. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticketmaker, the exotic wagering app.
They're off in the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Private Zone has run a 45 flat half mile and has opened up 2.5 lengths. Private Zone's got the lead close to home and he's all by himself. Private Zone wins the Forgo.
12:15 on the east, 9:15 on the west. The Matt Bernier Show here on DRF TV. However you're checking this thing out, whether it's live along with us or it's in the podcast version. Thank you for doing so. Normally what we do here, we give you a couple of races to take a look at, give you maybe some live long shots, maybe a vulnerable favorite or two. And then the following week, most of the time, we can go back and take a look, for better or for worse, whether I really kind of crapped out or we had a good weekend, and we'll go back and dissect it. Well, we had a couple of races last week, and then we took a look at 4 of them, to be exact, outside of the Belmont Stakes. And let's take a look and see what happened. The True North was one of the races that I was most interested in because you had a horse in Whitmore who, ever since he had been turned back to one turn, really hadn't done anything wrong. We're going to take a look at the replay right now as they turn for home. You have a horse in Roy H. coming in from Southern California who absolutely blitzed this field and put on a show. Whitmore is way at the back of the pack in those sort of maroon silks. He's just going to get involved in the running now. I thought a live long shot was Fellowship, who was just to the inside of Whitmore, but they are way behind right now, and there's no chance they're going to come close to Roy H. Stallwalking Dude, credit where credit's due. The Dude just shows up and runs his race, but Roy H., this was a giant performance from this horse for Peter Miller. I believe a 112 Beyer speed figure. And if this is what he is, and Dan Ellman made a really interesting case for this horse when we did the stakes preview for the True North, it seems like ever since he's been gelded, he's come back as a completely different animal. And you know what? Sometimes we see that happen. And he was a little bit dirtied up as well. He had a turf race where he was wider than wide. Bad trip didn't work. You had a downhill race that was going to happen, but then he got washed off the turf, and he ran just a giant race at Santa Anita. I believe he got a 106 Beyer in that race. But you've always got to be a little bit leery about wet tracks and how they make you look. Boy, he was awesome in this spot. I'm going to say live long shot with Fellowship, who ran 4th. You know, he was 15-1. I think he ran just fine. I wonder if he wants a little bit more ground. It's also worth noting the inside on Friday at Belmont Park on the main track really didn't seem like where you wanted to be. Outer portion of the racetrack where all 3 of these horses really ran. That was, I would say, ideal in that position. So something to keep an eye on going forward. Whitmore, I don't think you want to write him off just yet, but I do think he probably needs a bit of a freshening because he's had a lot of racing in a short amount of time. So most likely winner Whitmore, disappointing 3rd. Live long shot Fellowship runs 4th. The New York Stakes, we're not going to take a look at any sort of a replay, but we will say that the vulnerable favorite, one of the vulnerable favorites that we figured out last week, was C. Khaleesi. Now, this is, I suppose, a little unfair for C. Khaleesi, and even Decida, the other Chad Brown runner in the New York, simply because there was no pace at all signed on in there. I mentioned that I was a little bit concerned about that. Hawksmoor, I didn't think she wanted any part of the distance. But boy, when you get out there and you're allowed to walk the dog in the front end, and when you've got the best front end rider in the country in Julian Leparoux, whether it's turf or dirt, she's going to make you pay. Hawksmoor takes that field in the New York, wire to window. C. Khaleesi, she ran 4th. She tried a little bit at the end. She was compromised by the pace scenario. I'm going to say this was correct in this instance, but going forward, you're probably going to want to be kinder to her and say, you know what? She never really had a chance to do any serious running. When you get to Saratoga or wherever Chad decides to route her, she looks like she'll probably have a legitimate chance no matter what. The Jaipur, also a race that we won't take a look at any sort of a replay, but Loose on the Town, I thought was a live long shot. He went out there and he's just not as good as those other horses. It also doesn't help his cause when you have 3 horses, not 1 but 3 horses, excuse me, break a world record at 6 furlongs. Disco Partner gets the job done in 1:05.3, I believe, was the final time. And that sounds absurd, and it is absurd. He got a giant speed figure, I want to say, in the vicinity of a 1:09. Yeah, I don't want to hold that against Loose on the Town. He's probably not that good to begin with, and it doesn't help his cause when 3 horses break a world record. A race that we will take a look at, and we're actually going to be able to listen to Larry Colmus's call as well. The Metropolitan Handicap, I thought, was an interesting race going in. I had all my eggs lined up into the Sharp As Tekka basket, and I also thought a live long shot for Chad Brown was Economic Model, coming out of a sneaky good return effort to the races, but my goodness, you want to talk about showtime, not just for Bob Baffert, not just for Mike Smith, but for the horse himself. More Spirit puts on a show in the Met Mile. Larry Colmus with the call.
Taking the lead at the top of the stretch, 3/4 in 1:10.1, and it is More Spirit pulling away from Sharp As Tekka. Tommy Macho is 3rd. Awesome Slew is taken 4th on the far outside. This is just an unbelievable day for Bob Baffert and Mike Smith. They are unstoppable. More Spirit has dominated the Met Mile. He won it by 7 lengths.
You're not going to find many performances that are more impressive than that on a big day against a pretty decent field. This is 2 years in a row that we've been treated in the Met Mile to just electric performances. More Spirit this year, frosted last year. It'll be interesting to see what we get from that horse going forward. More Spirit, where they decide to route him, whether you go to a mile and an eighth, where you try to keep him at a mile. Your options are limited at a mile, though, and I don't think you want to turn him back now. I think you're probably looking at least one opportunity to go out to a mile and an eighth. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe you turn him back at that point. But an unbelievable performance. Most likely winner, in my opinion, going in was Sharp Azteca. He loses nothing in defeat. I think this might have been the best race of his career, and he still got his doors blown off. An economic model, probably a cut below, but I thought he ran just fine. I do wonder, getting back to 7/8 of a mile, maybe that's a little bit more beneficial, but he runs 5th in the Met Mile as a live long shot. So a bit of a mixed bag as far as our previews were concerned for last week. We'll find out. Maybe we can do a little bit better this Saturday. Both races that we're going to go over here after the break. Down at Churchill Downs under the lights tomorrow night. We'll find out what I like in the Matt Win and the Fleur de Lis when we come back in the Matt Bernier Show.
Well, the amazing thing about our work was just how similar he is to Uncle Mo. I mean, right away of all of Rapoli's babies, he stood out as the most advanced, the most precocious, and the most talented, and that was exactly the same thing we'd seen a few years before with Uncle Mo.
Outwork wins it for John Velasquez.
To be able to win a Grade 1 like the Wood Memorial in only his 4th lifetime start was very impressive.
It is Outwork in front.
California Chrome, straight and strong. Absolutely sensational. California Chrome. California Chrome. California Chrome. All the way to the Kentucky Derby. California Chrome wins impressively.
He's gone into overdrive. California Chrome wins the Dubai World Cup.
One of the greatest performances you'll ever see.
Chrome turns to gold.
Say goodbye to your inner caveman. If you're making caveman bets on pick sixes, you could be leaving money on the table. DRF Bets Ticket Maker helps you build more profitable exotic bets and place them with one click. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticket Maker. Be a samurai with your ROI. DRF Bets Ticket Maker helps you cut out unprofitable exotic bets before they happen and be the master of profits. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticket Maker, the exotic wagering app.
They're off in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Private Zone has run a 45 flat half mile and has opened up 2.5 lengths. Private Zone's got the lead close to home and he's all by himself. Private Zone wins the Forgo.
12:23 on the East, 9:23 on the West. The Matt Bernier Show on DRF TV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, Twitter, and Facebook. Hello to those of you, Lee Jones, Derek Hodge on Facebook, for reaching out. Thank you for watching while you're watching. Live, check this thing out, podcast. You got plenty of opportunities, plenty of chances. YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com. We've got 2 races that we'll go over tomorrow night underneath the Twin Spires, night racing. It's Stephen Foster night at Churchill Downs, but we've got full stakes previews up for all those sort of big races. You can find those over on video.drf.com. You can also listen to those and some more on Out of the Gate this week, which we'll lead right into that when this show is over. But before we get there, let's dive into a couple races. This first one, I'm sure a lot of people are going to think this is kind of boring, and why am I even talking about it? This is the Matt Win. This is the field. It's only a field of 6. And I think everybody's going to look at it and say, well, this is McCracken's show. And you can see, if you're new to this thing, on the far right side of the screen, those are my odds. It's a value line, what I consider fair value on each one of these runners. In post position order, Excitations 12-1, McCracken 9-5. Colonel's Dark Temper 8-1, Mo's Mojo 6-1, Aquamarine 7-2, Society Bow 9-1. The most likely winner, I'm not breaking any news here, that would be McCracken. We're going to take a look at his effort in the Sam F. Davis down at Tampa Bay Downs earlier this year. This was his return to the races, his debut as a 3-year-old. He ran very well. You see him on the outside in the Witham colors with the pink cap on. And he goes on and does things professionally. Now, unfortunately, ever since then, it's been as has been the case with all these other 3-year-olds, up and down sort of campaign where he missed some time with an ankle. He comes back and runs sort of blah in the bluegrass, but it was a nice prep. Figured he would be ready to go going into the Kentucky Derby. He got bounced around early. He was part of the scrum out of the gate, and he had a bit of a superficial cut. But, I don't know. I mean, look, he's probably just better than these horses at what is certainly going to be less than the 9-5 that I like. He might be 1-5 in here. He's just one that I'm not terrified of. He is way the horse to beat, but I'm going to try to take a little shot against him with a live long shot, and I could be getting just completely suckered into this horse. Mo's Mojo is my live long shot in here in the Matt win, and he's actually my pick. And Mo's Mojo, do yourself a favor, go into Formulator and pull up the replays. Mo's Mojo's most recent start, it has all of the makings of a trap horse. He broke his maiden on a wet track as an MTO against a bunch of turf horses that were running on a wet main track. That usually is a recipe for disaster, and that's usually meaning he's probably a little bit dressed up. The way that he ran, it makes me think that this is actually a horse that's just figured out what the heck's going on. He got an 80 Beyer speed figure in there. He got a competitive time form US rating. I believe it was in the 111 range. I just think this horse, Mo's Mojo, is interesting. I believe you get Julian Leparoux up. He's going to be my pick in the Matt win. Again, acknowledging full well that McCracken is the horse to beat. And keep in mind, this is the kickoff leg of an all-graded stakes pick 5 sequence tomorrow night put on by the folks down at Churchill Downs. Mo's Mojo is going to be my pick in the Matt win as a live long shot. Let's go to the Fleur de Lis. This is an interesting race. You got a field of 9. Let's take a look at the field. This is the return of a very, very talented mare, Forever Unbridled, for Dallas Stewart. Let's take a look at the field in post position order. Forever Unbridled 7-5, Walkabout 9-1, Carumba 8-1, Crooked Stick 99-1. No offense. Big World 6-1. Romantic Vision 6-1. Apology Not Accepted 32-1. Tiger Moth 49-1. Weep No More 32-1. Again, no question. Very similar to the Matt win. Very similar to the Stephen Foster. The most likely winner of the race is Forever Unbridled. We're going to take a look. This is her Breeders' Cup Distaff last year. Guess what? Those top 2 fillies are pretty darn good. You got Beholder, who's going to be a Hall of Famer. You've got Songbird, who we just saw win for fun, basically, in essentially a paid workout in the Grade 1 Ogden Phipps last weekend. Then you've got Forever Unbridled. And boy, is she trying her eyeballs out down in the back there. Joel Rosario, I love everything they did. Dallas Stewart, whatever the game plan was, I thought it was perfect in this race, particularly. You knew what was going to happen up front, and she's got a little bit of positional speed. She doesn't have to come from 100 out of it, but they said, we're going to take her back, we're going to make that one run, save something for the end. She ran tremendous in that race right there. My concern is that she had to have a little bit of an ankle surgery. They had to remove a chip. It's going to be her first start since that race in the Breeders' Cup, 1 1/8 all along. They were going to run in the Chicago Handicap next week, which is a 7/8 race, I believe, which just been nothing more than a starting off point. She can certainly win this race, but I'm just slightly against her in here. She's the most likely winner. I think she's also a vulnerable favorite. And in a live long shot in my pick in this race, we're going to take a look at the La Troyenne, if we have it. Do we have it, boys? We do have it. My live long shot in my pick is Romantic Vision. Romantic Vision is now rolling up on the outside. She's in those sort of, whitish green silks. She's trying her eyeballs out. She's running really well. The reason that this is such an impressive effort for me, in my opinion anyway, and you have Big World down the inside. We're going to see her again tomorrow night as well. Keep in mind, this was on Kentucky Oaks Day. And inside is where you wanted to be, particularly speed on the inside. Romantic Vision was neither of those, and she still runs very well to run second. She's only beaten by a length in here. I think Rusty Arnold, he also has Weep No More in here, but I think Romantic Vision is very, very interesting in here, but I think everyone that is a sort of trip handicapper and makes notes about the way tracks are playing, everybody and their brother knows that Romantic Vision was up against it in that spot there in the La Troyenne, but she will be my pick and is a live long shot in my opinion. In the Fleur de Lis tomorrow night at Churchill Downs, speaking of tomorrow night, Churchill Downs, I will be making my way down to Churchill Downs this evening, down to Louisville anyway. 8:30 tomorrow night, NBCSN. It will be the first of the Breeders' Cup Challenge Series races. It's a win and you're in for the Stephen Foster, win and you're in for the Breeders' Cup Classic Division. I'll be down there with all the NBCSN folks again, 8:30 to 10 tomorrow night, if you care to check that out. As always, on Fridays, we unveil the newest Out of the Gate episode. This week, we have the Stephen Foster. We have a little bit of Triple Crown talk mixed in there. We have the Salvatore Mile, which is a good race down in Monmouth Park, among other things, including our best bets at the end. That's going to follow this program here, but you can also find it in all the other places that you can find this show, video.drf.com, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, you name it, you can find it. That's where the podcast version lays for all of these shows. My show, Out of the Gate, anything else as well. Those of you that are watching live, again, live.drf.com, livestream.com, Twitter and Facebook, thank you for doing so. I want to wish the best of luck to everyone this week. And also, tip of the cap to Richie Migliori. Well done. He is leaving NYRA. Just going to go and spend some more time at home. He's a fantastic guy, really good analyst. He was a good jockey when he was riding as well. So good on Mig. He's going to take some time for he and his family. Wish him nothing but the best leaving NYRA. Without further ado, I want to wish again best of luck for all of you this weekend. We'll talk again next Friday here, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Let's roll it into Out of the Gate.